I believe that the Trump people are going to use something that happened to our next guest, basically. He is Tom Fitton. He is the president of Judicial Watch. And when Bill Clinton left office, Tom, he had a bunch of tapes of conversations he'd had with world leaders. And you wanted them, and a judge said you couldn't have them.
Well, that's right. And more importantly, I would argue in this case, the Justice Department agreed with the judge. The archives at the time agreed with the judge. And Clinton had kept these tapes of his engaging in business of the presidency, including calling foreign leaders, in his stock drawer. He didn't want people to have it. And, we took the current Justice Department position. Hey, shouldn't the archives get these records? These look like presidential records to us. And they told us to go jump in a lake, and the court affirmed that no one can second-guess the president's decision to designate records as personal. And so we were a bit shocked, to put it mildly, when the Justice Department took the opposite position, and the archives as well, in going after these Trump records. So the Clinton stock drawer case, not only highlights a defense for the president in terms of President Trump, in terms of having records he had a right to have, and he shouldn't have been harassed over it, but secondly, highlights the corruption of the Justice Department, protecting Clinton and then changing the law or their position, not the law, to harass Trump.
It is interesting because, normally we bring you on to say, hey, look, Judicial Watch won again, but you lost this one, and it is potentially a very important loss in terms of the precedent it sent. Judge Amy Berman Jackson, an Obama-appointed judge, said, since the president, talking about Clinton, is completely entrusted with the management and even the disposal of presidential records during his time in office, it would be difficult for this court to conclude that Congress intended that he would have less authority to do what he pleases, I mean, these words are amazing, with what he considers to be his personal records. That was the first part, right? And then she went on, the PRA, which is the Presidential Records Act, contains no provision obligating or even permitting the archivist to assume control over records that the president categorized and filed separately as personal records. At the conclusion of the president's term, the archivist only, quote, assumes responsibility for the president's presidential records, unquote. The PRA does not confer any mandatory or even discretionary authority on the archivist to classify records under the statute. This responsibility is left solely to the president. Fascinating, isn't it, Tom?
It sure is. And, don't those words blow out of the water the indictment against Trump, the legal basis and the whole argument?
They sure do.
My Lord.
You would think.
That's why, the Wall Street Journal thought it was worthy of putting in their paper on the op-ed section, and it's the question I would have, and I think the Justice Department should be asked: why is it they changed their position from Clinton to Trump,
right?
Other than politics, and that's the conclusion. The Durham report highlighted this appearance of bias. Why do we think it stopped with the publication of this report?
Exactly. Do you feel? I mean, obviously, the lawyers representing former president are clearly aware of this. I was aware of this a few days ago as well. It's just great to get you on to talk about it. But they're clearly aware of it. Do you think they're going to use it?
Will the president's team use it? I would think they're going to use every legal defense available to them. And I would hope they would at least alert the court to the gamesmanship by the Justice Department on the law and the application of the law. Looking at that Presidential Records Act discussion you had, not only does it cover classified records, but obviously it would seem to me to cover defense records, right, which is what they are trying, in my view, to get around the Presidential Records Act by focusing on this Espionage Act. National defense information is a category of classified information. And it's the same sort of thing that the president has authorization to disseminate and keep. I don't know how they get around it. I don't, unless they blow up the Presidential Records Act and refuse to allow Trump to take advantage of the law the way every other president since the law has been passed has been allowed to, in terms of prerogatives that they've been allowed to have. And, of course, prior to the Presidential Records Act, all these records were presumed to be the president's.
Right. The special counsel is promising a speedy trial. Is that because he feels he has to, or is that just bravado? Because he's not going to get one. I mean, where you've got classified information, which they're claiming it still is, just getting it to trial is a nightmare.
Right. I mean, they want Trump to be put in jail as soon as possible.
Oh, absolutely. I had him on a couple of days ago. The day before, we actually had a scoop, Tom. We like our scoops. We were the only interview he did the day before. He was already in Miami.
No, that's right. Yeah,
it was the day before.
Yeah.
So he spoke to us, and I reminded him that I told him a long time ago I didn't think they were going to rest till they found a way to lock him up. He didn't seem fazed by that at all.
Yeah, I mean, this is a serious set of charges in the sense that, if he's found guilty on even one or a few counts, he faces significant prison time. So, I mean, this isn't just a political debate. This man's liberty's at risk here. And I think any American should be outraged that someone may go to jail not because of anything they did wrong criminally, but because it was a political decision by the leadership of the Justice Department and the Biden administration. If I were Joe Biden, I guess he's not going to consider my advice seriously. I'd shut this down. I mean, he can tell the Justice Department, I don't want this prosecution to proceed. We're not going to destabilize the country. Make us look like fools across the world. As I'm not going to be the only president to jail my predecessor and my leading campaign opponent. That's just not the way this country's going to behave. But evidently, violence is complicity, in the least, in this indictment of President Trump by President Biden.
And
he's ultimately responsible for this. He is ultimately responsible for this, President Biden.
They're definitely not going to listen to you because the DOJ is hassling Judicial Watch right about now.
Oh, yeah. Well, they brought me in to testify about the sock drawer case before the grand jury in an act of outrageous harassment.
Right. I mean, I'm laughing, but it's actually not funny at all. It really isn't. It's just so outrageous. It's so blatant that it kind of makes you laugh. And then you realize, well, wait a minute. We shouldn't be laughing at this because it's actually really serious. This is the United States of America, and it appears to us, if it's true or not is almost irrelevant at this point, but it appears to us, depending on what your political persuasion is, will determine the kind of justice you get.
Well, let's just remember, President Trump was arrested yesterday. He was released ultimately, but he was arrested by Joe Biden. His administration arrested his predecessor. And, I just hope the country and our Republican withstand that type of abuse of power. But it's a terrible time.
It is. Can you give us an idea of a timeline here at all, Tom?
Well, unless the indictment is thrown out entirely, it would strike me that any federal court is going to be loath to conduct a trial in the middle of a presidential campaign. So it wouldn't surprise me if it were kicked past the elections.
Okay. That's what I'm saying. It's exactly the position I've said. It's just so hard for me to believe that they're going to take the leading candidate of the opposition party and try and lock that person up ahead of the vote. I mean, what am I talking about? Am I talking about Venezuela? Am I talking about Pakistan? I mean, it's just so outrageous. We're used to the stories from those parts of the world. This is America.
Well, it is America, but it's a very different America than it was yesterday, just even 24 hours ago, because Never did I think, although we saw kind of what things were going, that the Biden administration would try to jail Trump as aggressively as they have. And it's been, and if I were Congress, I'd take steps to cut off the funding of this operation, curtail the power of the Justice Department and the FBI, not in 2 years, but immediately. And, of course, the courts can take action as well. We'll see what the courts in Florida do with this. And, maybe Trump, knocks this out before it gets out of the gate, based on the sort of legal analysis that we're talking about here tonight. But they had no business harassing the president. It was all a setup, and you can't entrap someone into, quote, obstructing a crime that actually isn't a crime. So let's stop playing games. Get out of my court.
Tom Fitton is the president of Judicial Watch. If you want to find out more about Judicial Watch, you can do that at judicialwatch.org, judicialwatch.org. Tom Fitton, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.